quick Instagram live and talk about the Supreme Court decision that just was released today, the majority decision that essentially says that you do not have to redistrict by supporting racial minority groups and ensuring that they have good representation on races, and the progress we've made with these laws have been incredible to ensure better representation in our government. We have a lot of work to do still, but this really sets us back. I'm outraged by the decision, and I wanted to bring on an expert that would give us some context and allow us to talk through what this could look like, what the history of this decision was. And I'm really excited to bring in a friend who has been following this closely, Dr. Max Krochmal. He is a labor history professor at the University of New Orleans, previously at TCU, and he was born in Las Vegas. He grew up in Reno, and he studied Western history, and this is his expertise. And so, Max, are you on? I hope you are.
Wait, he was, and then he was gone.
Okay.
1 second.
All
Let's try adding him one more time.
right. Well, while we're waiting, I'm sure
All
you
right.
have seen. Oh, hi,
There he is.
Hi,
Dr.
how are you?
Krochmal. Max, welcome.
Thank you. Let me see, I'm not hearing you great. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Good to see you, Alexis.
It's so good to see you, and thank you for taking the time. I know we are on different times, even time zones, and you've got a family and work, and I appreciate you taking the time to really put this decision by the Supreme Court in context for Nevadans. And if you don't mind, just give us a little bit of why you are an expert on labor law and why you are an expert on U.S. history and election law.
Yeah, well, I study civil rights and labor politics. I'm a historian, and in particular, I'm an expert on the Voting Rights Act. I've served as an expert witness and been admitted in federal court as an expert to talk about voting rights and especially how voting rights works in the diverse terrain of the West, sort of how it affects both African American communities and Latino communities.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, with your incredible expertise, just let the group know what happened today, what the Supreme Court released today, what this decision kind of means in the macro and the micro.
Sure. So I'm a historian, so I'm going to just back up a little bit, right, and remind viewers that the Voting Rights Act itself, right, was a product of the civil rights movement, of the Black freedom struggle, and a huge amount of blood, sweat, and tears, and people marching and organizing on the ground in Mississippi and in Alabama and other places. And finally, Congress responded by passing the Voting Rights Act, and Lyndon Johnson signed it into law. And the purpose of this was to end, almost a century of discrimination that was happening in the South under the Jim Crow segregation system. And they sent federal registrars into the South to make sure that people's right to vote would not be abridged. It's evolved quite a bit since 1965, and maybe most importantly, in 1975, it was expanded to include what the Congress called language minorities, which meant that it would apply to U.S. Latinos and Latinas who had also faced systemic discrimination across the U.S. Southwest. And so cases from Texas, from Arizona, from other places, eventually California, Nevada, all these places, started to receive relief from the Voting Rights Act, and particularly its requirements that any jurisdiction covered by the Voting Rights Act was required to pre-clear changes. And what that means is if they make any change to the voting system, whether that's maps, whether that's how people vote, whether it's the way ballots are printed, if you're being monitored for having a history of racial discrimination, you are required to submit those changes ahead of time to the Department of Justice before you could make those changes. And what it did was it meant that voters of color, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, eventually indigenous people also are getting relief under the Voting Rights Act. All these groups are able to go to court and say, wait a minute, the proper methods were not followed, or more, or under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, they were able to say our vote is being diluted in an unconstitutional way. So just to say a couple more things, in 2013, the Supreme Court threw out the pre-clearance part of the Voting Rights Act, which had been hugely important. But even then, it has continued. And just 3 years ago, the Supreme Court affirmed Section 2, which said that that minority voting rights could not be abridged under the act. And so what happened today is that the Supreme Court basically threw out the entire Voting Rights Act. The majority decision that was written by Justice Alito basically moved the goalposts and wrote new criteria for how the Voting Rights Act would work, how it should be applied, so that it would be impossible for a plaintiff to ever win a case. And one of the things it did was say that you had to be able to prove a specific act of intentional discrimination on the part of a state, or otherwise it would not be allowed.
Right. Well, what do you think this means for redistricting that's going to happen in 2030, or even redistricting that states can certainly do on, by ballot, which we've seen happen throughout the United States moving forward?
Yeah, it's going to lead to a flood of changes. And indeed, today, after the Supreme Court handed down this ruling, Florida's legislature already approved a new voting map, right, designed to give advantage to Republicans in the state and to white voters in the state. Now, of course, the way it works legally still now after today, discrimination based on race is unconstitutional. Even the court agrees with that. However, gerrymandering based on partisanship is perfectly legal. The court ruled that just a couple of years ago in what Justice Kagan today called, a grave mistake. So they've reinforced that piece now. So as long as the legislature says we're doing this for partisan reasons, you can gerrymander as much as you want. And so that's what we've been seeing all over the place already in the last few years, where a number of red states started gerrymandering to get more votes for Republicans. California and Virginia and other places have responded by trying to change their lines to give advantages to Democrats. So what this means, for one, is that state politics everywhere have become nationalized, that every election everywhere has national consequences, and it has to be connected to that broader sphere. So Florida's already doing it, and it looks as though a bunch of states in the South and Republican-led states, as well as I think one Democratic-led state that hasn't yet had their primaries, they might try to rush to do some of that this cycle, or if not, probably before the 2028 elections, we're going to see massive changes to the voting maps across the country, as well as to other parts of voting rights, like voter ID bills will proliferate, other attempts to crush fraud that doesn't exist. There will be a bunch of different changes that affect how people vote, and they will all be for the worse as far as it affects voters of color, Black voters, Latino voters, and others.
Right. I mean, we are already seeing this. The governor has put on the ballot for the second time voter ID, and it's because he wants to make sure that he turns out the base. And we know that that's going to make mail-in ballots really tough in Nevada. And what is kind of heartbreaking about all of this gerrymandering we're seeing both in red states and blue states is that it's a Democratic ideal to ensure that you have fair districts. And whatever the partisanship is, it's making sure that there's proper representation. And that is really the heartbreaking thing, and why people are so sick of politics as usual, because this is not the way we do business in the United States, nor should we. I'm wondering if you could weigh in on what you think this will do to Nevada.
Yeah, and just before I do, I wanted to say, I think you're completely right. This is about a fundamental tenet of democracy in any country, that people have fair voting districts, fair access to the ballot. And the way we've interpreted the Voting Rights Act, the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it, which was, true to its original intent, was that people of color need to be able to elect candidates of their own choosing.
Right.
And in a country in which block voting still predominates, in which there's racially polarized voting, it's very difficult to do that unless there is some attention paid to how the districts are drawn that takes race in as a factor. And what the court said today is you couldn't even consider race unless these very, the strictest of tests and of intent that didn't exist previously. And as you mentioned, voter ID, it's terrible that's on the ballot again.
Yeah.
Voter ID laws, we've seen over and over again that they do, in fact, disfranchise voters of color, Black, Latino, Asian American, Indigenous voters. There's all kinds of problems with that we have studies that show that it's harder for folks to get documents if they're in these different targeted communities. There's very little evidence of voter fraud. As a historian, I trade in evidence. There are very few cases nationwide of people doing fraud by voter impersonation in person. And so what we've seen in this rush to just franchise people, right, is that Republican legislatures across the country have not just pushed voter ID, but they've clawed back on mail-in ballots. They've made it harder for third parties to help you deliver your ballots.
Right.
They've made it harder to register people in all these different places. And all of those are different ways that are chipping away at our democracy, at the ability of ordinary people to get to vote and to get to choose someone that they believe in. And so for Nevada, I think, it's all going to depend on this election, that the state has an opportunity to do as some states have done, pass like a state level voting rights act that guarantees that districts will be drawn fairly or in a nonpartisan way. That's one way states are doing it. Right now, Nevada has some of the most restrictive laws around third-party ballot delivery, and it's been shown to have a particularly negative effect for Indigenous communities in Nevada and a couple of other states. So that's something that the new governor and new legislature could change, is to make it so that it's actually possible to get your vote turned in and counted, which we all think we want if we believe in democracy. And I'll just say too that this is a really important moment, right? We have the current midterm elections, of course, but in the next governor of Nevada is going to be in place in 2030 as we gear up for the census, as we gear up for, all of counting of people, and that has real consequences. It'll determine reapportionment, which means how many members does Nevada get in the U.S. Congress. It'll determine voting maps and the next round of redistricting. Usually this happens every 10 years. So all of that will be based on the 2030 census. And so, right now it's hugely important that Nevada elects somebody that's going to fight hard to make sure that people's voting rights are respected and that census is done in a fair manner so that everybody's counted and so that Nevada gets the representation numbers that it deserves.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point on the restriction on drop boxes. My commission had this discussion when we were approving drop box locations, when we were approving voting locations, in-person locations, early voting and day of voting locations. And our staff have done an incredible job ensuring that people have access. And actually, we have tribal presence in both of the tribes within Washoe County. So tribal members can go and vote at the tribal council offices. That is a big deal. And we work with the Secretary of State's office on that. And recently in Nevada, we received a very big yay for how accessible our elections are. And so by a think tank who had done some research on other states and what they've done to ensure accessibility. But I don't think that Nevadans need to let down their guard knowing that. I actually think we need to make sure that we strengthen these rights, make sure that we put mail-in ballots in the Constitution so that there is a way for people to access mail-in ballots. And I think that the other thing that a governor needs to have is that local experience, which neither one of my opponents have, of understanding what your registrar of voters office, or in smaller counties, your clerk's offices need to have a successful election and get out results quickly. Guess what? You need additional staff. You need warehouses to process mail-in ballots because their offices are not big enough. They weren't made for mail-in ballots. You need real resources, technology, and we still are behind on providing those essential resources for our local communities. And so I think that, communities need to continue to push for their elections to be accessible, for everyone to have opportunities to vote, and ensure that they're well resourced as well. Because, in my opinion, the longer we take to process the election results, the more doubts we get nationally. And Nevada is one of the later states to process our what happens, the outcomes in the election, and it really takes those resources to ensure that we are successful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was going to ask you. I mean, I know I'm an expert on this in one other way, right? That you had to deal with some really kind of scary attacks on voting and votes getting counted in a recent election there in Washoe County. Can you just tell us a little more about that?
Absolutely. As a county commissioner, I was on the front lines and as the chair of the board of election denialism in Washoe County, and had very scary board meetings where community members tried to take over board meetings with public comment, disrupted public comment. I had to have folks removed, and even move public comment because it was not allowing the board to do the business of the county. My life was threatened. I had to put cameras all around my house. And we were covered nationally for the amount of threats on elected officials in the state of Nevada, because there are so many women who are in office in the state of Nevada. So we have disproportionate harassment because of being female. And we push back. Sadly, my board voted. I certainly didn't, and neither did Commissioner Garcia, but voted not to certify one of the recount pieces of the election. And we, thank goodness, were able to turn that around and make the right vote. But we were on the national scene of, what does election denialism do to a county and do to your country? And that's why your elected officials, your local elected officials, are the front lines of ensuring that your elections are safely carried out. And I think folks don't realize this. Yes, there are national standards like we are talking about, but it sounds like the Supreme Court is just getting rid of those. And then you've got your state laws, right? And those are pretty good in protecting your election rights in Nevada. And then your local governments actually are the ones who conduct the elections. And so these are the folks you see in your grocery store that, people can get quite aggressive with. So I think that it's really important to understand how those layers work and how you're going to ensure that people are protected on the statewide level. I think having that local experience is essential to making sure that you can govern correctly in the state of Nevada and understand what needs to be done, what resources need to be given. And I feel like in the state, and I speak to local electeds all over the state who agree that when you're in a local elected, it's like, good luck with your problems. I wish you luck, because we're not given the proper resources and there isn't the expertise needed to make sure that we are able to carry out the duties. So we need support, especially when democracy is on the line in the way that it is in Nevada.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think you're right that the states are going to be so important in this moment because the Supreme Court really has gutted the Voting Rights Act. I mean, the majority is pretending they didn't, but they pretty much threw it away. And they did it through this bureaucratic language, but they killed the Voting Rights Act. Make no mistake. And so, yeah, states are going to have to double down their efforts to make sure that the vote is protected. And I think, we'll see a lot more state voting rights acts, and we'll need enforcement from a strong governor. But I was going to ask you, like, as a local elected official, when you went through all that, did you get support from the state? Did you get support from the Attorney General's office? Were you able to, feel that kind of backing that we needed to make sure democracy would happen?
No, we did. We were threatened a lawsuit, which was a fair lawsuit because my board did not certify the recount. But I think what really upsets me about the Attorney General's office is that I had two board members who still voted not to certify and nothing happened to them. And that happened throughout the state. And I think, we've got to make sure that we are upholding the law and really digging into holding our counties accountable, holding our elected officials accountable. And I don't see that happening on this instance, as well as many other instances where you really need someone to dig in on the problems that are happening within the state, not just in the national level of joining lawsuits. We need support on the state level. And certainly, I think that there was just nothing from the governor's office. So I think that he is having to play a very delicate balance of pretending that he doesn't support Trump, but really being close to that administration and understanding that that is a political liability. So, he's not genuine at all in the way that he governs, sadly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's good candidates in there running.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important people know who is running for office, that they engage, they ask them the hard questions, they ask them if they're going to properly resource these very important offices and support the local jurisdictions. And I think we need to remember our history and make sure that these people in our country who sacrificed so much, these incredible Black leaders through the civil rights movement, and who continue to push and ask for better accountability on all levels of government. We've got to do better for them. And I think I want to end this on a positive note, though. Max, you wrote a book about how minority groups in Texas came together and sought out power and pushed for better representation. And I think there's a lot to learn from that organizing. And I think people need to, instead of just thinking, oh, despair, everything's
Right.
a mess, we still can organize. And I think you, with your experience, it would be great if you could kind of give us an idea of what that was all about and why it was successful and why we need to continue to do it.
Yeah, sure. And I think we fixed the sound, hopefully. I was just going to say, yeah, so the book it's a big book, but I would say that the most important part of it is that, as you said, African American folks, Latinos, white labor leaders and progressives were able to come together over several decades and overcome some of their differences and figure out how to work together both in politics and in the streets. And what they learned over a long period of experimentation was that the more they talked about those differences and the more that they prioritized the issues of people who were really being targeted by the right wing at the time, which were the segregationist Democrats. It's a different political context. But the more committed to justice they were, the more they talked about issues that might be seen as too extreme, the more they won, right? That people wanted to see solutions for their problems. They didn't want mealy-mouthed moderate politicians. They wanted to talk about the issues that really affected their lives and have people that they could elect reflect that. And so they went out and they built a campaign organization in the streets, with thousands of block captains across the state of people who volunteered and really brought change to Texas and to the nation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so I think that what we need to remember is that we have primary elections coming up. You can organize, you can find a candidate to get behind. I hope you'll get behind me because I want to bring real change to the state. And I'm having a town hall on my election policies on May 20th. It will be in Las Vegas. Check it out, please RSVP. And I'll be unveiling how I want to protect Nevada's elections and what kind of laws and executive orders I want to put in place as Nevada's next governor. And also remember to stay in community and continue to organize, because we are more powerful when we work together. So thank you so much, Max. Dr. Krochmal, I really appreciate it. You're a dear friend, and thanks for continuing to highlight these incredible people and ensuring that we don't forget our history.
Wonderful to be here with you. Good luck.
Thank you.